Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Irene Santadakis, and I'm here today as the Director of Foundation Relations and Grants at PEN America, where we champion the freedom to write and the freedom to read, recognizing the power of the written word to change the world. This is our 20th World Voices Festival. Since 2005, the festival has stayed true to its roots, celebrating the power of storytelling and literature and translation, and convening global voices across borders, languages, and cultures. Over the last several years, PEN America has tracked an alarming rise in book bans across the United States, and our Freedom to Write Index has tracked the cases of over 300 writers who are detained or imprisoned around the world, either for their writing or for their exercise of their free expression. In this moment of censoriousness, the festival will honor the power of literature and celebrate the stories that illuminate, interrogate what divide us, and help us imagine new futures. This year, we are proud to present over 35 events featuring more than 100 writers over 4 days of celebration, dialogue, and cultural exchange. For those of you who are new to PEN America, and I hope there are many of you in the audience today, we are a member-driven organization. We have members in every single US state and chapter cities across the country, from Detroit to Tulsa and from Birmingham to Miami. We welcome all of you to help bring our mission to life, and I encourage you to check your program right now for more information on how to join PEN America as a member. I also want to take a minute now and thank our existing members and our bookstore partner, McNally Jackson. I also want to thank our special partners, the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment, the Department of Cultural Affairs, the New York State Council on the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Amazon Literary Partnership for their invaluable support of our work. For your safety before we begin, I also want everyone to please take note of all the exits in case of an emergency. Now, I am especially pleased to introduce today's event, Bringing Back Books They Love, which will be an insightful conversation about revisiting already published novels in a world vastly different from the world into which they were first released. What drew these authors to revisit these titles now? What do they love about these books, and how do their evolving interests as writers and human beings shape their view of these works today? This event will feature Mexican author Carmen Boullosa, the author of 19 novels, plays, essays, and poetry collections, including Texas, The Great Theft. She was a Guggenheim, a DAAD, and a Coleman Fellow, and the show Nueva York on CUNY TV has won her 7 New York Emmys. We are also joined by National Book Award and PEN America Lifetime Achievement Award winner, Joyce Carol Oates. She is the author of innumerable works of fiction, poetry, and nonfiction, including Broke Heart Blues, which was re-released this year for its 25th anniversary. Moderating the discussion will be Sabir Sultan. He has curated literary programs for nearly a decade, and prior to PEN America, he was the director of events at the Strand Bookstore and an events manager at Barnes & Noble. Thank you all so much for being here today, and thank you for our guests for agreeing to take part in what promises to be a wonderful event. Please join me in welcoming Carmen, Joyce, and Sabir.
Let's see. Good, I got it. So, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you, Joyce, and thank you, Carmen. It's such a pleasure to be in conversation with you both. I think, as Irene sort of set up in the introduction, this will be a look back at sort of reissues, which both of these books were recently re-released, and then we'll have a sort of broader conversation from there. But to begin with, we're so happy to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I thought we'd also start off with a reading from each of you to help set the stage, and I'll share a bit about the books after. But why don't we begin with you, Joyce, and then we'll go to you, Carmen.
I'm just going to read for about 2 minutes, so don't panic. My novel is called Broke Heart Blues. It's set in a sort of long ago time, and it has several sections. I'm just going to read the very beginning. There was a time in the village of Willisville, New York, population 5,640, 11 miles east of Buffalo, when every girl between the ages of 12 and 20, and many unacknowledged others besides, was in love with John Reddy Hart. John Reddy was our first love. You'd never forget your first love. And where John Reddy wasn't exactly our first love, for after all, our mothers must have loved our fathers first when they were young, in an unfathomable abyss of time before our births, and certain of our Willisville mothers were in love with John Reddy Hart. He supplanted that first love at its very memory.
Oh gosh, to read 2 minutes, I have to now read 2 minutes, because the other way would be like unpolite. I had chosen another thing, but let's read 2 minutes. Where is the bullet?
You could do 4.
No, I'm going to, well, maybe it might become 4, but let's see. 118. I'm just going to read a little passage that makes sense in itself, because the passage that Joyce so fortunately chose, in which the book starts, kind of sets the book somewhere. We already know where we are. And in the case of this book, because we are in a moving frontier, and because all the book is going to be a gossip passing from one character to the other one to tie a story, the story of what happened in the frontier when Texas had just been stolen from us by the Americans that wanted, the gringos that wanted to keep slaves, and we didn't like the story of slavery, to say it short, and they also liked our cows and our land. So it's kind of difficult to choose 2 minutes. But what triggers the novel is a bullet. So I'm going to look for another bullet, now that I already said where it happens. But let me see if I find it. If I don't find the bullet, we'll skip my reading. No, this is the bullet I'm looking for. This is not the bullet that is going to conduct the gossip. It's another bullet that is a fisherman is shot before he's lynched, a Mexican that is lynched in the book. And it's a very short passage, and it says, "The bullet that has come to rest in Santiago's head comes to life. It knows it wasn't meant to end up there. The fisherman's noble, sweet brains, washed with the sea air and the silence of high tide, soothed it. His brains pour out in luminous silence. The bullet has rendered them insensate. No fear, no fatigue, no longing, no children, no wife, no nets, no Nepomuceno, not even the river remains."
Thank you. And I'd be curious to hear, so Carmen, this book was first written in Spanish and published in 2013, and then Deep Vellum did a translation of it with Samantha Schnee in 2014. And so it was re-released for its 10th anniversary. And I'm curious what you thought of that, the idea that they wanted to revisit this book. You're a very prolific author, as is Joyce.
No, not as prolific as Joyce, because when I read that novel that was published in 1999 was her 29th novel. Am I right, Joyce?
If you say so.
I read it. I don't know if it's true, but I read it.
Well, I don't think we really are counting. You know, quantitative reality is not as interesting as qualitative.
So then would you mark time by the books? What books would count in qualitative time? Like, is it the body of work? Is it the books you love that you've written? Just out of curiosity.
What is the question?
Oh, I was riffing off of your comment that we don't count books in like quantitative time. And
Well,
so,
I just don't think that we think of our lives that way. You know, there are people who like to cook, they make dinners, but you've made like 11,000 dinners, but when you do it tonight, it's something new and fun. You know, so you're not always thinking about one's history.
I would make a question to Joyce if I can. I want to ask her, why did you want this book in this minute to be re-edited or republished? Is there because I read that it's a book I read your forward, but just to tell the audience, what made you publish the book again?
Well, it's sort of complicated, but I think Brokeheart Blues is really my only novel of all these, you know, thousands of novels. It's really the only novel that's quite tender, and it's almost a little sentimental. It's very nostalgic, and it's about a time in America before school shootings and before this cyberbullying and cell phones and TikTok and things that are kind of really, I think, somewhat ruining the adolescence of children today. But when I was in high school, we didn't have those things. So I think people were more focused on the locality, like the people, your close friends, and people were not on a cell phone at all, and they weren't looking at images of their bodies that were very, bodies very idealized and deformed and distorted. So I think it was just another era, which is kind of a welcome contrast to our era, which is so electronically plugged in.
And that was, let's say, the little string that brought again that book into desire to be in the bookshelves. In my case, I republished the book because it was the anniversary of the publishing house. This book, Texas the Great Theft, was the very first book that Deep Vellum published. I gave a reading, we were in a book fair here in New York, 4 Mexican writers in the Pavilion of Mexico that was much shorter than this. It was like the 4 of us were in just one little sip. And we were, each one of us, reading whatever we had just recently published. But we were reading in English, a little passage of those books. And it happened that a very young guy, full of tattoos, passed by and was curious. And I was reading this and I told the story, this is when just Texas had recently been stolen from Mexico. And they have a very stupid sheriff in Bruneville. And the guy who used to own that land has a problem with him because he's been insulting somebody that worked with him, and he shoots the sheriff. And then all the story starts, and this is all about the text. And the guy, I saw him there standing on the book fair, people move, they go back and forth. And this young guy with thin and very, very young, full of tattoos, when we finished the reading, he came to me and he said, "I'm going to publish your book." "Which book?" "The Texas book. I want that book." "What's your publishing house?" I asked him. He said, "No, I still don't have a publishing house. But my publishing house is going to be called Deep Vellum. And your book is going to be my very first book. And we talked a little bit more about authors we liked and things, and he had translated things from Russian, and I liked the guy. I mean, it was so peculiar, and so thin, so many tattoos, and so out of proportion what he was asking me about in a publishing house he didn't have, that I said, okay, yes, this is my agent, this is my email, yes, I'll give you the book with pleasure. And my agent, Jennifer Lyons, called me and told me, are you nuts? What are you thinking of? What are you going to give your book to somebody that doesn't even have a publishing house? And I told her I like him. I kind of like him. And he wants to do this publishing house with only translated literature. And we talked about some authors we both like, Russian and a German and a Japanese, and we had a literary conversation, and I was a young guy that I trusted. I said, no, we think it over. No, I've thought it over. So by now, Will Evans, Deep Vellum has published lots of books on, I don't even know the number, on literature, on translation. He has acquired Dalkey Archive and other independent houses, and it's become something pretty beautiful in a country that publishes only 3% of its books in translation. So I now that the publishing house was going to have its 10th anniversary, and he told me, we are going to celebrate the 10th anniversary with republishing your novel, Texas, that, by the way, has sold nicely for an independent house and has had a beautiful life. And I said, yes, of course, whatever you want, yes. I have published other books with him. And that's the reason. It was totally involuntary to publish again the book. It's not that I needed at this moment. Of course, when the book appeared, I said, oh, this was the moment. This book had to appear. When we have this Agent Orange in the seat of the presidency. And it's perfect to talk about this way, about what happened in Texas. So that's more or less the story in my case. But when I saw you luckily invited me to this event with this celebrity, I saw her book, and I was puzzled because both books have so many characters. And in the case of Joyce's book, she ends the book with this kind of prayer to all the characters, naming their names as in a magic act of recovering those things that she wrote about, and that she remade some years of hers that weren't really hers because she was the neighbor of them. So it's kind of interesting. In my case, there are much more characters, only 375, and the story is built while the gossip of what happened between the sheriff and the ex-rich owner of that land had this problem. And then the invention, this is historical, Juan Nepomuceno Cortina did invade the USA 9 times. He was never defeated, and he stopped invading the USA or staying in the USA, claiming his land back, only because the Mexican president betrayed him. He invited him to Mexico City to honor him, and when he arrived to Mexico, he was imprisoned in his own house. In a house that was given to him as a present by the Mexican president. And that was a gift of Porfirio Diaz to the American government.
Oh, well, that note of gossip you bring up, and it's one of my the section of the book that just caught my imagination, is it spreading the story of Nepomuceno's interaction with the sheriff spreads across 200 pages, various characters. And with Joyce, your book too begins and ends with almost that choral function where you see all of these people who in the high school sort of worship the main character, John Reddy. The girls want to date him, the boys want to be him, the men, even the adults in that town sort of aspire to it. And I was sort of curious, how'd you come up with that approach for the novel? Why did you want to capture that community voice to situate it?
Well, I think there's a certain romance of mythologizing people who are not really known to you. We see this with celebrities, obviously, and some political leaders. We sort of see an image or a symbol. We don't really know the person. So I'm kind of fascinated by this mythologizing and the obsessive projecting onto. Well, you see it in our politics today, where there's so many things that are kind of abbreviations, like sound bites and very reductive, like either or choices that we're asked to make. Yeah. We know that life is very complex, and we know that no one person is perfect, but I think we have, it may be sort of hardwired in our brains as Homo sapiens that we tend to revere a certain kind of archetype, that somebody is the leader, or maybe we're pack animals and we want to have a leader. And we see in times of fascist leaders sort of draw upon that yearning for people to sort of hide themselves in the collective, you know. But in my novel, the boy who's the romantic figure, when you get to know him, he's not like that at all. It's basically this investigation of how we imagine people to be different than they are. I also wanted to write about, because I didn't live in Williamsville myself, I was in the country. I grew up on a farm, so I was bused into this school in a very affluent suburb of Buffalo. So I became kind of an anthropologist, I think, noticing that very, very affluent suburban world, which I didn't really belong to. And the novel is looking at, we would call it today, complete unfettered white privilege. These are young people whose parents are very well-to-do. They live in big houses, but they don't have much sense of themselves. There's no politics in this novel. I think if I were writing it again or something similar, I would have a whole dimension of the political. But here it's more this intense, extreme intense nostalgia for adolescence.
Well, I'd say there is sort of this element of the political, or not the political, but the way his mythology spreads. The movie, The White Dahlia, about his mother, who's a key figure in the novel. So for context, at the novel's start, John Reddy has just come out of a year in jail for killing Melvin Riggs, who was his mother's lover. And so like that way he becomes this cult-like figure in itself feels political. And I say that in the idea of like what we worship as a society, what we care about, who we see and are attracted to. And I think for you, Carmen, too, with Nepomuceno, he's also that sort of figure, except there's not quite a reveal with him. There's not the appearance of normalcy. We see him in this, he's a man of like extremes and contrasts, I would say. Let me know if you agree with that, but like you see him be abusive, heroic, like villainous in parts. And there's that same sort of, I want to say Christ-like figure, but that's a bit too much. But yeah, I'm curious too, why are you also interested in that idea of mythologizing someone, Carmen? Do you think of what you did with him as an act of mythologizing?
It's an interesting question. I was much more attracted to the historical moment than to the character. And I was much more attracted and attracted is not magnetized by the complexity of the inhabitants, the people that lived in Texas, in the Mexican and then American Texas. And I was puzzled, how did they, because it was they thought it was an immense territory, and they were different communities living there. So how did they react to the subversive act of Nepomuceno, who in reality was not thinking of, he was only thinking of his own land. He was not thinking about the others. He only wanted, his mother had given her land to the founder of the town. The name is changed, but it's Brownsville. And it's true that the mother of Nepomuceno had, let's say, borrowed her land to the founder of Brownsville, who happens to be something like the grand-grandfather of the founder of Citibank. And the father of the founder told her, lend me your land and I'll make you rich. I'm going to make it produce. I'm going to just design, we are going to put a little bit of money on it, and we are going to sell the land, and this is going to be a big business for you and for me. And after she gave him the permit, he just stole the land from her. Because she was Mexican. And the promise that they were going to keep their properties was only a promise, it didn't happen. So Nepomuceno was fighting for his land that was his mother's, and he didn't care about the others. He was only on that. In the start of the novel, he cares about a guy who works with him and is beaten by the sheriff. And he can't stand that. But it's not that he has piety or he sympathizes, he thinks of himself. So I like the idea of this character that he's thinking of himself, and all the ones that get ignited by him for different reasons. So we have, and I have like one of each kind. For example, the enslaved African Americans that fled to Mexico, that were thousands, and that fled to Mexico because in the minute they crossed the frontier, they became free men. Slavery was forbidden in Mexico. So I have two of them being pretty important characters for different reasons. First of all, because they don't want to be enslaved again, and they join the fight against their natural enemies. But as them, we have the community of Germans that have arrived to Texas, and that community existed, and they all wanted to found a community, a socialist community where they were promoting culture. They arrived with their piano, and they were all the time reading, and so they appear there. How do they react to the Nepomuceno uprising, to say so? Nepomuceno gathers a little army and invades, as it happened in reality, invades the USA, but he invades with a variety of persons. So I had them, each one of them, reacting. So it was it's an exercise of not a historical analysis, but the kaleidoscope of that moment, of those years, and I put each one of them in action in that army, and the ones that like Nepomuceno, the ones that don't like Nepomuceno, and all goes running through the gossips or the stories, the way they are telling the stories to each other, while we see the action happening. So it was for me, it's not that I fell in love with Nepomuceno. I mainly don't like characters with which I fall in love. I like characters that I can have little fights with them. But also because it permitted me to explore a territory, imaginary, but it has a historical reality. So that was more or less what my pulled towards the novel. Now, if I was going to analyze Nepomuceno like a magnetic character in his times, he was a magnetic character. And he was extremely violent, and he was only thinking of himself, so I don't know. He was illiterate, so he didn't write much. He wrote whatever he could dictate to others to write. It was not his own pen. So I don't know in reality. And he was not a man of power. He was a man of action and selfishness. So that's the story. Yes, he was in a way a hero. People adored him till they forgot him. When he arrived to Mexico City before being imprisoned, people surrounded him all the way. They were, que viva Nepomuceno, que viva Juan Cortina, Juan Nepomuceno. And then at the very end, he was buried in a white coffin, and nobody followed him anymore. He was just abandoned by the masses, to say so. While another tyrant was running the country, and I didn't felt interest for the other tyrant. I ignored him.
Off of that, Joyce, how would you define the sort of characters' relationships to John Reddy Hart? Like,
Well, I spoke of the mythologizing before, but just speaking just in general terms, I think we have a certain fascination with class in America, and my position in the novel is sort of a peripheral, like looking at these people, and that there are working class people in this affluent suburb, but they don't really belong. So I've always been kind of fascinated as somebody who comes from a working class background, sort of looking at America as a very class stratified society that pretends it isn't, you know?
yes.
Because John Reddy Hart he comes from the West, and he doesn't belong there either.
No, and he's treated with it's great. When the novel first introduces him, he's 12 years old, 11, driving his mother's Cadillac, sitting on top of several telephone books. Like, very much this sort of like Western figure brought into the fore.
I really wanted to write about more tender feelings. It's a comedy, and it doesn't really have an unhappy ending, you know. I feel that in life we have some tragic experiences and some very positive experiences. Most of the time when I write, though, I'm writing about situations that are more likely to be tragic. I consider that somehow more universal. But a comic vision, looking at foibles and foolishness in people, with a sort of tenderness, you know, you really get to love comic characters. It was a real experiment for me to see if I could write a novel like that. Somebody is killed, but the circumstances are very complicated. And actually, it's a murder mystery because you don't really know who the murderer is. People think they know, but it's not that person. So the reader finds out who did it, but the people in the novel don't. That was experimental kind of perspective, point of view for a writer. And I've done that in other novels too, where I will have something that seems to be one way, but if you read more carefully, you see it was really not that way. But I just assume that most people are not going to read that carefully. I try not to ask people, don't ask, don't tell.
Maintain some of the mystique. Hang on, but I would say then if you're both very prolific, so I know we were joking earlier, but you have 60 novels, short stories, plays. Carmen, you have 17 novels, 10 plays. 17 collections, 17 poetry collections, 10 plays, and 19 novels. And so I'm curious, how do you play across all of that body of work? Do you have any sort of unifying interests, as Joyce sort of indicated her own of that reveal. Do you, Carmen, have anything you're trying to pull out across your body of work?
Well, I'm a writer, and that's what I do daily. And that's what I've been doing since I was 15 years old. And I love my profession. And writing has so much to do with real life and what is happening around you, even though if you are not particularly talking about what's happening around. All writer, the pen of all writers vibrate with what's going on around, what's happening to the collective. So it's true that one writes alone, isolated, but all writing always has a very deep dialogue with the others. First, in the sense that we use language, and language is only collective. We cannot speak a language that nobody else follows. Grammar is a collective creation. It's done through generations. Language is also a capital of all the others, not yours, and that's what we work with. So even though if you want to, I may think I'm a poet also, and I have written my poems of something that happens deep inside of me, but I am using a collective mirror to say so, and I'm talking of the others too, always also talking of the others. So, and I have my personal little obsessions that I follow from day to day, and it also happens with books and with novels that you finish one and that one has already pulled the next one. They are like a set of dominoes that one throws the next, and you continue. You follow your work. It's not that I don't know exactly how to explain that. It's not something that I say, oh, I'm going to write a novel. Yes, I say, oh, I'm going to write a novel, and I work very hard exploring how am I going to build it, how I am going to do the map of the novel, which tone I'm going to use, etc. But they come, I wouldn't say naturally, because it's not natural, but they come one after the other one. And if I ever wrote a biography of my own writing, I'm sure I could find some coherence from one book to the other one. Why the first ones were on childhood, then I did the ones that have the history of Mexico and the Caribbean, and then I go from one to the other one. In the case of Texas, because I live in a frontier, I teach in New York City. I'm a Macaulay Honors professor. I teach there. I taught at City College many years. I taught at Columbia. I taught at NYU. So I've been a professor. And I'm Mexican. And I haven't ever left Mexico City. So in reality, I live in the frontier. So writing my Texas was writing about something very personal for me. I live in a frontier. I have sat in tables aside very brilliant people, cultivated people that turn around to me and say, but you aren't Mexican. Yes, of course I'm Mexican. My gardener is a Mexican. And I live in the frontier. So I live it daily. I see my people here, and I'm always thinking there. But it's not that I said, oh, because I live in the frontier, I'm going to write a novel about the character, that etc. It happened that because of the one I had written before, and then I, by chance, found the character, and then I started exploring, and then I discovered that Mexicans were lynched in the frontier, not one or two exceptionally, but there were lynchings. It was normal to lynch Mexicans. That was, for me, it's a central part of the book, the lynching of the Mexican. And then I didn't know also about the African Americans fleeing to Mexico, and I got obsessed about the theme. And I didn't know about the communities that were done between the Moscovos and the African Americans, and all those characters that appear, the Indians that lived in Texas, the immigrants from different countries, all that, they happened because I was obsessed about that suddenly I was writing. So I know that I always have my ghosts as a writer and the things that I care about, but the stories tend to be more plurifacetic. They have lots of faces, so you get involved into different themes, to say so. And if I could choose again what I would like to do of my life, I would again choose to be a writer. It has given me so many lives, different lives and different views of the world, and that mystery that is to be alive. And the worst of it is that we all are going to die. So all that is the best thing that could happen to me in my life, past my life as a writer and a reader. I have had many lives. I don't know if Joyce feels the same, that she has had different lives, or...
Yes, I think that's true for most writers, poets. It's like another world to live in. But we go through stages in our own lives, and there's a stage where you're in your 20s and things seem really very important, and then you're a little older and they seem less important, but other things come along. And I'm actually at the stage in my life when I write quite a bit about being a widow, because becoming a widow was a stunning experience for me, and I'm still sort of assessing it. I've written a memoir about being a widow and sort of having the aftermath of life, you know, when it seems that you've lost the most important thing in your life, like how do you keep going? But this novel is really, you know, adolescent. So when I was this young, I would never have anticipated that I would even be a writer. I think most of us, when we're little, we have no sense of what the journey of our lives will be. It's been truly astonishing.
And also, isn't it like something, I sometimes wake up in the morning and I say, why I have 70 years? I never imagined I was going to be a 70 years person with my grandkids, and why? And inside of me, I still feel that little teen or that little young woman saying, it's me, I'm you. And I'm saying her, no, excuse me, you are not me. But at the same time, I listen to her and I say to myself, why? I am that. I am that person. Not that I complain. I like being a person of 70 years old. My mother died at 36. I consider it a privilege. Every year is a privilege. But there's something that is a big quiz. And I think that writing helps us go through our different lives, or, yes, lives inside a life, or even identities inside an identity.
Well, I mean, obviously, with time, you have both, I assume, to an extent, feel as though your, like, mastery of craft has, like, increased with each book. But I'd be curious to pull in what Carmen was saying earlier and ask you, Joyce, when you're writing novels, when you're writing books, are you going one book to the next? Does the last novel sort of orient you towards the next?
No, I wouldn't say so. I usually take a break and work on short things. I'm interested in psychological realism and sort of sociological historical realism, but I'm also very interested in exploring Gothic and horror fiction and, you know, dark fantasy or surrealism. So the two do overlap. But if I'm writing in a mode that's Gothic and, you know, dark fantasy, it's a certain kind of rhythm. The language is maybe a little richer, more poetic or evocative. But writing in a more realistic vein, it's a different kind of dialogue. I mean, they really are sort of shifting consciousnesses.
Which gives you more pleasure, if may I ask, or more pain? If you can't grade it or you consider it a stupid exercise?
No, I like to inhabit another person, and obviously you do too. This is what novelists do. And get into the consciousness of another person. It doesn't have to be necessarily in a realistic setting. It could also be a surreal setting. But I don't write fantasy in the sense that there are dragons or, mythological creatures. I'm writing about real people, and the Gothic elements are probably from the unconscious, the psyche. Every night when we fall asleep, we dream, and the dreams are just so astonishing and totally unpredictable. Some of our dreams seem to come from some other dimension. And I think that one thing about our lives that we never really understand is the relationship of our dreams to our lives. I think writers and poets and artists try to mediate that a little more than most people, probably.
Yes, for me also, I am not so much a writer of characters as of a writer of atmospheres. And for me, the reinvention of my pen, to call it that way, is how to find the tone in which the novel is going to grow. How is the book going to speak? Because language has all those tones that is incredible. A phrase, you just change a little bit or put the point other place or tie it in a different way in the same paragraph, and then it becomes another thing. So for me that is, I wouldn't use the word possession, but I loved what you pointed of dreams, because for me that is the sacred space of creation. I need let's say, not the foam, because it's not foam, it's something not sticky because it doesn't stick, but it's something very peculiar what comes out of the dreams, and I need it to write. I don't know how to explain that exactly, but I need that is almost uncontrollable, but I need it because that's what finally guides me into finding the tone, or finding the tone of language. And I'm trying, like, I in a way I pass my life trying to catch again, not the anecdote of the dreams, but that feeling, feelings, because it's not always the same, that is very much real, but very much intimate, but very much collective, but very much, I don't know the word, but it's a material that I need, that by the way is similar to ink in many ways, because ink changes so much, can be totally translucent, even the same ink, or become deep if you stay longer with the pen. And I need that space of the dreams to work and to go after it. Need it. Not so much with my brain, but with my pen and my feeling to say so.
That's sort of, and I'll flag that in a couple of minutes we'll be going to the audience Q&A, so if any of you have questions, please start thinking of them. We'll have standing mics in the audience. But that idea of atmosphere being what you write, and you, Joyce, talking about like realism, I'm curious how genre plays into that for you, because I know you've written books under Rosamund Smith, Laura Kelly, I think too, and like this, when you're putting on this hat of like the nom de plume, does that change your sort of approach to realism, your approach to atmosphere?
Well, I'm interested in the forms of literature. So if you're writing a mystery, especially like a classic detective mystery, the structure is quite different from more of a literary novel. Literary novels, in theory, are each individual, but mystery novels do have the structure. The structure usually begins with a body is found in the beginning. It could be the first paragraph, and then the novel moves along. It's sort of linear and with an investigation, but it also moves back in time because you have to go before the murder to sort of get a context. Then there's always a kind of contract between the writer and the reader that the mystery will be solved. So in the final chapter, the mystery will be solved in some way. Now, if you're reading a literary novel, there's no guarantee. You know, it could be like Fitting Its Wake. It could just go on and on forever. It could have a kind of irresolute ending where it's you know, it's a question. But I think that's the difference between genre work and you know, mainstream work.
Mhm. And then I'm curious too, before we go to the audience Q&A, what, at this point in your careers, is there anything you haven't written yet that you want to? Sorry, okay. Well, maybe we can narrow it down and make it a bit more specific. Like, what would you like to do that you haven't had a chance to do? What would you like to write that you haven't had a chance to write?
I think it'd be very challenging to write a good limerick. I don't think I could do that. I could write a 900-page novel, but...
Brevity is difficult.
No, a limerick is a thing. No, for me, every book is a reinvention. And if I would now talk of what is my biggest ambition is to finish the book I'm writing, because I'm not following a formula. And it's been an adventure that, it's an adventure. I really, even though I arrived to the end, I've been rewriting these parts, rewriting the others, and I don't know if it'll happen to me like it happened with a book I published some years ago called The Book of Anna, that I first wrote it all in verse. I wanted to give Anna Karenina the book that is told in the Anna Karenina novel that she wrote, and then the author forgets about it. And then I decided I was going to write her book. And inside the Anna Karenina, Tolstoy says that it's a book for young people. So I decided I was going to write it, and that also in his correspondence he says he could finally write Anna Karenina when he met the daughter of Pushkin, who was the grandson of the black slave of the Tsar. So she was another race, and Anna Karenina is other race. If we read it with those eyes, it's true that when she comes down off her horse, Tolstoy describes her differently. Her hair is different, the tone of her skin is different. He says that the tone of very old marble, it's a very strange tone. So, and he could see Anna Karenina when he saw a woman that was partially mulatto, partially black. So, and also I thought, well, if it was for young people and if it's in that epoch, they have fascination for popular stories. Is the moment when they are collecting the popular stories. So I decided to write it in verse, an honor to Pushkin, and also the story of the black slave of the Tsar in verse. So I wrote it, but as told for young readers, my young readers, literary novels, not young readers. But it was the challenge I had placed, and I finished it. It was difficult to write, and it was, I would even say it was extenuating to write it. And when I finished it, I was first very proud. I let it sit in my desk, and I read it again, and I said, this does not work. So I rewrote it completely different, from beginning to end. But I needed that very first version to be able to get what I needed. A book with its own, I do have the book of Anna Karenina, but it's the book already written when she's addicted to laudano. She's opium addict. In the novel of Tolstoy, it's not a lie. She needed it to sleep and she could really wake up. So I did write it inside, but I had to give it a different frame. I gave back to Anna Karenina her adult children. But all that happened because the book needed it. I wanted to write that book. I had written a whole version, but it didn't stand up. So what I don't know now in the book I'm writing now is if it'll really stand up when I let it go, when I finish polishing it and read it again aloud, as I do always with all my books, and I get into the Manila Galleon adventure and the Asian slaves in Mexico, the whole thing they have there, and then I have it, and all the books I have been reading to figure it out. And when I finish it, maybe it won't stand up, and I'll need to write it again. So all I want now, my biggest ambition in this minute, is that I hope I can finish my book, meaning I hope it stands up. I don't know if it'll be this version or if I'll need to again do another rewrite and get in another version. I hope not. I hope not, but I don't know. And in reality, why I say I hope not, what I love to do is to write. Oh, if I have to write it all again, I can write it again. Nobody will complain. Well, my poor hands, they are all rotten because as I write with my own hands, still handwrite everything, they kind of, but I use my gloves and I can continue writing.
Well, and then, Joyce, to pull that question to you, what is sort of your next project? What are you looking to do with it?
Well, I'm finishing a novel. I'm almost always finishing a novel. But I do have a novel coming out in June. That's my first experiment in writing a whodunit.
Oh.
So it's very carefully plotted, and it has like an intricate backstory. And it's about a middle school teacher, a male, who really abuses his students, his girl students. And I was sort of centering in this context of our society of enablers, where there are people who behave very badly, but it's the people around them who don't seem to notice, they don't chastise them, they sort of allow them, and they take no responsibility. So often when you have, say, a predator in a school or anywhere, the predator is really operating because other people allow him to. We've seen this in the church, for instance, with priests who are predators, but also in schools too. So I wanted to explore that idea that the community is sometimes to blame, that people are not held to account for their bad behavior.
And where does it happen? Where does it happen?
South Jersey, which is a perfect place.
Why is South Jersey the perfect place?
Oh, well, I think for political reasons. Do you know much about New Jersey?
I'm not too familiar. Somehow, I've managed to live in the city.
Well, there's North Jersey, Central Jersey, and South Jersey. And I don't know that they're still active there, but the Ku Klux Klan was at one point active in South Jersey, so you have kind of a sense of what the state is. It's Trump territory. Yeah.
Well, with that, I think we can turn to some audience questions if anyone has one. You can raise your hand. Oh, Roger from McNally in the back.
Forgive the abstract questions, but I'm going to use the cliche, books sometimes take a life of their own as you write them. So have you ever started a book where, let's say a traditional literary novel, and then you're halfway through the book and you go, oh no, this is actually a mystery or a fantasy, and then changed it up midway and take it a different direction?
If this question is for me, no. I wouldn't get in my car to drive to New York and go in the southerly direction. I mean, I always know what I'm doing, and I always have the very final lines, this final scene. And I try to get my students to do that too, rather than just driving out blindly into the wilderness, but to have a sense of where they're going and what they're aiming for.
I always do my maps and my plans of how the book is going to be. I draw the road. I think I'm going that place. And it has never happened to me that in the middle of the book I write another book that is not what I thought I was going to write. I could finish it, as I confessed already with that book, and it has happened to me that I have done several versions of a book with a different tone or a different rhythm to have it done. But no. Nevertheless, when I wrote the book of Eve, that I also researched and I wanted to recover the old versions of Eve in the Jewish mythology and Mediterranean mythology. It was a little bit for me when I was planning the book. I said, oh gosh, but this is like so much fantastic things. And I tried to avoid them, but they were in the map. They were in the road. I couldn't skip them. They were there. But I understand perfectly what Joyce says, that you can't suddenly just, no, I better go left. No, you can't do that. Because writing a novel, also it has something like a substance, like a river, like water. There's something that goes, that pushes into the next, you can't just deviate it, or I can't.
Well, there are really two kinds of ways of writing. Say, exemplified that James Joyce planned out everything very carefully. He knew what he was doing. He had a notebook filled with epiphanies. And his writing was really very cerebral, though it's beautiful and sensuous too. But then the contrast with Joyce, who always knew what he was doing, would be D.H. Lawrence. He would start writing just passionately and be carried along in the momentum of the dramatic scenes and dialogues and characters who really come alive. There was a letter that he wrote when he was working on Women in Love. He said, I'm on page 300 and I don't know what my novel's about. And then Lady Chatterley's Lover, he rewrote twice. That is, there are 3 Lady Chatterleys, but the third one is the one that is the classic. The first 2 Lady Chatterleys are interesting because the characters are there, but the tone is completely different. And the third Lady Chatterley is really an excellent novel. It's filled with the kind of lushness and psychological realism that we associate with that kind of writing. So that's an example of a writer who didn't necessarily revise so much as he would rewrite. He would just rewrite the whole thing.
Now, the case of, is a beautiful example, but I think the case of our Spanish classic, Quixote, that contains so many different books inside the book, but all those books need the book, though as it was written, part of it in jail, and then other parts in the road, and then other parts escaping the people he owed money to, could feel like a mixed thing and added in the last minute, but it's not. It has it. And the parts of it, or maybe we readers, have given it the solidity of a whole book.
Yeah. Thank you for this.
Mike is coming.
Thank you for this. It's kind of a 2-part question. The first of which is not deviating from genre or the river, but when you're writing, in the process of creating a novel, have there been moments that have surprised you? And if yes, what are the most perhaps memorable moment of surprise? And the second question is, are there characters that you've written that you revisit, and who are those characters and why?
Well, I'll begin. When I wrote my novel Blonde, which turned out to be 800 pages, I had anticipated it would be like 200 pages. And so I think that I just fell in love, became mesmerized by the private life of Marilyn Monroe. And I learned more about her, of course, as I went on doing research. And I saw all her movies that are available. So it was sort of like a journey. I had thought it would be a sort of postmodernist novella. But then as I got into it, I saw that Marilyn Monroe had been so underestimated. I mean, really not appreciated, especially during her own time. And then I looked at the movies and I could see her maturing as an actress, and I found that I had so much to say about each movie. So that was a good example of an experience that is based on real life. I mean, it is a historical novel, but once you get into it, there's so much that you could unpack and kind of flesh out. And also to answer that question, I think we all as writers get brought along by characters talking. You know, two people start talking and you don't know where they're going, but they kind of ricochet from one another and lead into one another. I remember David Mamet said that the way he started the play was two men are talking, and one wants something that the other doesn't want to give him. And out of that sort of generates a play. And that's sort of like the core, that somebody wants something somebody else maybe doesn't want to give him.
I'm going to answer your question number 2. It happened to me, I wrote a novel about pirates. A community of pirates in the Caribbean Sea existed, in which everybody, all were equal, not regarding how they had been born, or if they were the son of a king, or if they had been escaping slavery, whatever they were all totally equal. There was no private property. There was nobody ruling them. They did a communal ruling. Those were the brothers of the coast. The novel is called They Are Cows, We Are Pigs. And the only thing they had totally forbidden are women. Women could not enter their community, because if a woman entered, they were all going to enter the desire of private property. That was their talking about it. And when in the beginning of the novel, I have a woman dressed as a man that wants to join the community, but she evidently can't hide it long enough. So she vanishes. We don't know where she goes. But I kept her with me. She was there. I mean, it is not that she vanishes involuntarily. It's obvious that she cannot join the community. And a couple of 3 or 4 years after finishing the novel, I recovered her. I needed that character. And I gave Claire a novel of her own. And I made her, yes, she had taken that boat. Yes, she had wanted that adventure. Yes, sometimes she dressed as a male. Yes, she was, but she arrives to Mexico City. And there in Mexico City, she has a fabulous story. So I no longer felt in debt with her. Let's say she was there kept, and then I got it right. But I have another character of another book that I gave her a horrible ending. It's a novel that is called Antes Before, translated by Peter Bush. And I have always desired to, even though she maybe dies in the end of the book, she's dead, because she tells the story when she's all gone. I have always wanted to write her another ending. And I haven't been able, and I'm in debt. And I hope I do it before I die, because if not, she's going to make me miserable in the other world.
And I think we only, unfortunately, have time for just one last question.
Sort of on that line, was there, in the two novels we're talking about, were there surprises that when you reread them, you went, did I write that book? Or were there characters that you wondered about in memory, that sort of thing?
Oh yes, I think we always come upon that. We sort of fall in love again with some of the characters, and the experience of being a writer is, to some extent, the experience of being a person in time. So what you're doing and who you're with at the time you're writing the novel is sort of embedded in the work too. It's like a little snapshot. And of course, decades go by and all that's gone. You may have lost people you loved, but the novel is sort of like a time traveler. And that's always quite kind of astonishing, or it could be upsetting too.
For me, I don't understand how I wrote it. It was very difficult to write, and I really don't know how I did it. I remember all the notes I took and how I did it, but when I reread it now, when they did this edition, I was saying, how did I do that? How did I do that? And not feeling I had done it. Yes, it's very mine, but it's very not mine, it's very her own. And that for me was very striking, how really books do have their own inertia, to say so, or they command in a way. And as a writer, what you have to do is like, how do you get the text rule you? In the case of the kind of novels I write, how do I be possessed, to say so, by it? And I could with Texas, and I just still don't get it. How did I do it?
Unfortunately, I have to bring this to a close, but it has been such a pleasure talking with you, Joyce and Carmen. It's been lovely.